In the same way that you initially opposed a timetable in Afghanistan. Now you're for it, although it depends. In the same way that you say you would have ended the war in Iraq, but recently gave a speech saying that we should have 20,000 more folks in there. The same way that you said that it was mission creep to go after Gaddafi. When it comes to going after Osama bin Laden, you said, well, any president would make that call. But when you were a candidate in 2008, as I was, and I said if I got bin Laden in our sights, I would take that shot, you said we shouldn't move heaven and earth to get one man. And you said we should ask Pakistan for permission. And if we had asked Pakistan for permission, we would not have gotten it. And it was worth moving heaven and earth to get him. You know, after we killed bin Laden, I was at Ground Zero for a memorial and talked to a young woman who was 4 years old when 9/11 happened. And the last conversation she had with her father was him calling from the Twin Towers, saying, Peyton, I love you and I will always watch over you. And for the next decade, she was haunted by that conversation. And she said to me, you know, by finally getting bin Laden, that brought some closure to me. And when we do things like that, when we bring those who have harmed us to justice, that sends a message to the world, and it tells Peyton that we did not forget her father. Right. And I make that point because that's the kind of clarity of leadership, and those decisions are not always popular. Those decisions generally are not poll tested. And even some in my own party, including my current vice president, had the same critique as you did. But what the American people understand is that I look at what we need to get done to keep the American people safe and to move our interests forward, and I make those decisions.
All right. Let's go, and that leads us, this takes us right to
We are now going to this issue of Iran agreeing in principle to talks. What would you accept, Dr. Jill Stein?
Yes, well, you know, Iran has agreed to talks. Prior to agreeing to talks, Iran actually launched a program, a proposal for regional and global nuclear disarmament. You know, so I think there's every reason to proceed with the talks and to proceed in good faith. The sanctions, you know, have put Iran in a very difficult position. The economy is crashing. Iran is in desperate straits. There is enormous room to move. And, you know, I think when Romney talks about the centrifuges spinning, this is actually allowed under the non-proliferation treaties. The signatories to that treaty actually have a right to undertake the refinement of fuel for nuclear power. And there is nothing to distinguish Iran's current program from legitimate development of nuclear energy. I would add that to really obtain security on nuclear weapons, and by the way, the clock is ticking on nuclear weapons as well. And it's not just that Iran has the potential to get nuclear weapons, but that nuclear weapons are proliferating many places around the world. And the more places that have them, the more difficult they are to obtain. But the clock isn't ticking just because of nuclear weapons. It's also ticking on account of nuclear power plants. And in fact, to look at the crisis in Fukushima, that crisis is by no means resolved. And in fact, every nuclear power plant is itself a source of enough nuclear fuel to create approximately 100 nuclear weapons from every nuclear power plant around the world. And we currently have over 100 such nuclear power plants in this country. And as long as we are engaged in continuing to have these nuclear power plants with their very dangerous nuclear waste, which will not go away no matter where it goes, and that waste is on site because there's no place to put it. This is an extremely dangerous situation on account of nuclear power here at home, the proliferation of nuclear power around the world, and its connection to nuclear weapons around the world. So in fact, where we want to go with Iraq is not only to stop Iraq from developing a nuclear weapon, but to have a nuclear weapon-free Middle East, as well as a nuclear power-free Middle East, and in fact, a nuclear weapon and power-free world.
Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party.
The initial question was, what deal would be acceptable? And did you notice not either of these men ever said anything about it being a two-way deal? What would we offer? Would we offer to immediately normalize relations? Would we immediately offer trade? Would we help build up the relations between Iran and other nations in the Middle East? And would we demand that Israel finally sign the nuclear non-proliferation agreement? And then ultimately, we have got to provide leadership. If you read Jonathan Schell's excellent book, The Seventh Decade, about the history of the buildup of the nuclear arms race, it's so clear. It was the United States that started. And then we see Russia, China, Israel, now North Korea has nuclear weapons, and we're not going in and threatening to bomb North Korea. Pakistan, India. Pakistan, we tried to get them not to build nuclear weapons, and they said, but Russia and India have them, and Russia and India won't give them up because China and the United States won't give them up. So it all comes back to the United States, once again, failing to provide that important international leadership. That is why we're in the fix we're in, facing such a nuclear explosive world, and we need the leadership to move in a very different direction. It can be done, but not the way we're going with either the Democratic or Republican parties and their candidates. Now, secondly, the question was asked, what if Bibi Netanyahu called and said the bombers are on their way? And then, of course, Mitt Romney wouldn't answer, but he always refers to what great friends he and Bibi are because they did business together years ago. But don't forget, Mitt Romney has stated on the record he would ask Bibi Netanyahu, what should I do? That's how obsequious he is. And when these Democrats wrote the letter to President Obama trying to put the heat on him to go along with this Prime Minister of Israel who's making peace impossible by continuing these outrageous settlement developments in Israel, and now in Jerusalem, this President Obama and Mitt Romney both would fall slavishly in line with whatever Israel says. Have you noticed not one of these candidates have mentioned Palestine tonight, the rights of the Palestinian people, or what can be done to bring about real peace between Israel and the Palestinian people?
And the president made the claim to being on the right side of history. But in fact, you know, while Mitt Romney makes him look good, there should be no mistake that it is not the right side of history to have been bombing Pakistan on day 3 of his administration. He chose to intensify the bombing in Pakistan as the prelude to surging the troops into Afghanistan and then expanding the drone wars into Yemen and Somalia. And it is so clear that this blowback that we are seeing across the Middle East now, you know, is not going to be solved by a greater use of force, a greater show of brute military force. In fact, that is the problem to start with, because dropping bombs on weddings and funerals out of drones is not the way to win the hearts and minds of the Middle East. And in fact, this policy of brute military force has been an abysmal failure. After a decade with many thousands of lives lost from American soldiers, hundreds of thousands of civilian lives lost, trillions of American dollars spent on this ever-expanding war for oil, this ever-expanding war against the nebulous concept of terror, which is forever becoming more complicated and more vague and more broad. This is not what the right side of history looks like. And we need to say no to this endless war for oil, this endless war on nebulous terror, and begin instead to bring our resources home to create true security here in America, creating jobs and putting an end to climate change by using our dollars to do so.
Rocky Anderson.
I just want to say that people can come up with their reasons for U.S. policy, but we know, just like with our miserable healthcare system being dictated by the corrupting influence of money from the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industry, and the influence of the military-industrial complex on our military spending, AIPAC, one of the strongest lobbies in this country, are dictating to our politicians, and I've seen it happen. I've seen the breakfasts and the lunches they have, and they get these people to stand up and vow their loyalty to Israel and everything that AIPAC wants them to do. And all you have to do is read President Obama's speech. Last time he appeared before AIPAC, it was embarrassing that the President of the United States kept saying over and over, essentially, I'm doing everything you want me to do. I'm doing everything that is in Israel's favor, and never, once again, mentioning the Palestinian people. So once again, these Democrats sign off on these letters to the president, trying to put him further and further into that camp, which is contrary to our own security interests and long-term security interests of the Middle East. What's behind that is the same thing that's behind all of the other major failures in public policy, and that is the corrupt lobbying and the corruption of money in our political process.
Let's turn back to Bob Schieffer, the debate moderator.